The paper was still in his hand when Rex started growling. It was a low sound, the kind that didn't come from the throat, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere older, the part of a dog that remembers danger before the mind has a chance to name it. Jack Thompson looked down at his German shepherd, then back up at the man sitting across the kitchen table. The man was smiling, his suit was clean, his handshake had been firm, his words had been warm and carefully chosen. Everything about him was designed to make you feel like you were already safe, but Rex didn't move. He sat at Jack's left side, his amber eyes fixed on the stranger, a low, steady vibration rising from his chest like a buried engine that wouldn't quiet down. "Welcome back to Jack and Rex Tales." "Sorry about him," Jack said quietly. "He's usually friendlier than this." The man, Mitchell Hale, gave a smooth, easy laugh. "Don't worry about it. Dogs just need a little time to warm up." He slid the folder a few inches closer across the table. "Take your time with those numbers, Jack. This is a big decision, but I want you to know we built this specifically for veterans, men like you, men who gave everything for this country and deserve a chance to build something lasting." Jack looked at the folder. Evergreen Veterans Community, a housing development, a chance to invest in something close to his heart. The brochure showed beautiful homes, a community center with a flagpole, the stars and stripes raised at the center of a clean green courtyard. The numbers showed a modest investment, $40,000, his entire savings, and a return that would double within 3 years. Rex growled again. Jack placed his hand gently on the dog's back, feeling the tension there, the coiled readiness in every muscle. He had trusted this dog's instincts in places far darker than a kitchen table. There had been a night in Afghanistan, a road that looked empty, that had looked exactly like every other road, and Rex stopped cold and refused to move one step further. That moment had saved 3 lives. "I'll need a few days," Jack said, closing the folder. Mitchell Hale's smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted just slightly, just for a moment. "Of course," he said, "take all the time you need, though I should mention we only have a handful of spots left. Once they're gone, that's it. We wouldn't want you to miss your window." After Hale left, Jack sat alone at the table for a long time. Rex rested his head on Jack's knee and looked up at him with those steady, patient eyes that had always understood more than words could carry. Jack rubbed the dog's ears slowly, staring at the folder. He was 50 years old. He had come home from 22 years of service with a bad knee, a quiet kind of tiredness that never fully lifted, and a savings account he had built dollar by careful dollar for a decade. He didn't have much family left, but he had his word, his pride, and a deep, unshakable instinct for the shape of a lie. And something about Mitchell Hale had the shape of a lie. The next morning, Jack drove to Millhaven. He hadn't told Hale. He hadn't called ahead. He had written the address from the brochure onto a piece of paper, folded it into his jacket pocket, and driven 40 minutes through gray November roads with Rex in the back seat and the radio off. He needed to see it the way it really was, not the way someone had prepared it to be seen. The GPS took him off the main road and down a long street where the pavement cracked and the streetlights leaned crooked. He slowed when he saw the sign, Evergreen Veterans Community, a place to belong. The letters were bright and freshly painted, but the sign stood alone in front of a chain-link fence, and behind that fence, the world the brochure had promised simply did not exist. Jack stopped the truck and sat there without moving, looking through the windshield at rows of half-built houses standing silent in the cold morning air. Some had roofs, some didn't. Plywood covered windows where glass should have been. Weeds had grown knee-high between concrete foundations that had never been built upon. A small playground sat near the entrance, the swings bare metal chains swaying empty in the wind, the slide brown with rust, a child's sneaker lying abandoned in the dirt beside it. There were no workers, no trucks, no sound of hammers or machinery, only the wind moving through an unfinished ghost of a place. Jack stepped out of the truck. Rex jumped down beside him and stood close, his shoulder pressing against Jack's leg. They walked to the fence together and stood there in the cold, looking through the chain-link fence at the hollow shells of houses that were supposed to be homes. He took out the brochure from his jacket. Bright blue playground, fresh white paint, clean sidewalks, smiling families on green lawns. He held the paper up and compared it to what stood in front of him. Same fence line, same street corner, different world entirely. They took pictures, Jack said quietly, more to himself than to Rex. Fixed them up, made it look finished. Rex pressed closer against him.
Jack stood there a long time in the cold without speaking. He thought about Mitchell Hale's firm handshake and his easy smile, and the way he had said "men like you" with just enough warmth to make it feel like respect instead of a target. He thought about every veteran he had ever known, men who came home tired, men who trusted because trust was how they had survived, men who had given the best years of their lives and come home to find the world had moved on without them, men who deserved better than to be hunted by people who wore patriotism like a costume and used it to pick pockets. His jaw tightened. Rex looked up at him. "Let's go find out who else they talked to," Jack said. It didn't take long. 3 houses down from the evergreen fence line, on a quiet street of small, neat homes, Jack knocked on a door and a woman named Clara Simmons answered. She was in her early 60s, with tired eyes and steady hands, and the particular kind of dignity that comes from a hard life lived honestly. She recognized Jack's old Navy jacket immediately. Her husband had been Army. He had passed 2 years ago. "Come in," she said simply. Inside, over coffee that she insisted on making, Clara told Jack everything. Mitchell Hale had come to her door 6 weeks earlier. He had known her husband's name, known he was a veteran, known she was a widow living on a fixed income. He had shown her the same brochure, used the same words, "built for people like you," and asked for $35,000 as an investment deposit. "I gave it to him," Clara said quietly, her hands wrapped around her mug. "I thought it was for veterans. Harold would have wanted me to. I thought it was something good." Jack looked at the brochure she slid across the table, identical to his, right down to the photograph of the flagpole. He looked at her receipt, $35,000, wired to a company called Evergreen Residential Partners, LLC, 3 weeks ago. "Has he been back since?" Jack asked. "She called once, said the project was on schedule, said I'd have a full update within the month." She looked down at her coffee. "I haven't heard from him since." Jack nodded slowly. Rex, who had been sitting quietly near the door, walked to Clara's chair and rested his head gently on her knee. She looked down at him, surprised. Then her hand moved to his fur, and she held on, and Jack looked away because her eyes had filled with tears she was too proud to let fall.
He drove home slowly that evening. Rex sat in the back seat and watched the dark countryside pass through the window, and Jack drove in silence, with both hands on the wheel and something heavy and cold sitting in his chest. He had seen this before. Not exactly this, but the shape of it. The way some people looked at men and women who had served and saw not sacrifice, but softness. Not honor, but opportunity. The way they wrapped the theft in a flag and called it an investment. By the time he reached home, the cold feeling had become something else, something quieter and more determined. He sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open and began searching. What he found came together slowly, then all at once, the way the truth usually does when someone has worked hard to bury it. 3 different LLCs bearing Hale's name, 2 of them dissolved after civil complaints. The Evergreen land tangled in ownership disputes, no active construction permit on file, no licensed contractor, no completion timeline registered anywhere. A web of paperwork designed not to build something, but to look like something was being built. Jack sat back in his chair and stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't complicated, once you could see it. It was just a flag wrapped around an empty box. Rex was lying at his feet, chin on the floor, watching him. "You knew," Jack said quietly. Rex's tail moved once. Jack reached down and laid his hand on the dog's side, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Outside, the November wind pressed against the windows, and the old farmhouse creaked the way it always did, steady, honest, unchanged. He stayed there a long time in the quiet, thinking about Clara Simmons sitting in her kitchen with $35,000 gone, and a husband's memory wrapped around the reason she had given it. He thought about all the others Hale might have visited, all the doors he might have knocked on in small towns where veterans lived quietly and trusted too easily and had no one to check the paperwork before they signed. Then he stood up, picked up the phone, and called the county sheriff's office. The investigation moved slowly at first, then with a momentum that Jack had not expected. He gave his testimony. He handed over the property records, the business filings, the dissolved LLCs, and Clara's receipt. Then he went further. He spent 3 days driving back roads and knocking on doors, not because anyone asked him to, but because he knew the type of man Hale was, and men like that never stopped at 2. He found 4 more veterans who had received visits. 2 had paid deposits. 2 had come close.
He drove them to the investigator's office himself, one at a time. He sat with each of them in the waiting room the way someone should have sat with them before they ever signed anything, and he listened without rushing, without judgment. There was a man named Earl, 71 years old, Marine Corps, 2 tours in Vietnam, who had handed over $28,000 because Hale had mentioned Earl's unit by name, had said his research showed what men like Earl had sacrificed, had looked him in the eye and called him a hero. Earl sat in the plastic chair of the sheriff's waiting room and stared at his hands and said, "I should have known better." Jack looked at him for a moment and said, "He knew exactly what he was doing. That's on him, not you." Earl didn't say anything after that, but his shoulders straightened, just slightly, in the way of a man setting something down that had been too heavy to carry. Mitchell Hale was arrested on a Tuesday morning. Wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, criminal impersonation. He had falsely claimed to be a licensed developer and a veteran himself. He was neither. On the day the arrest was announced in the local paper, Jack drove back to the evergreen fence line. He parked the truck and got out and stood there in the thin winter sunlight with Rex beside him, looking at the half-built houses and the rusted playground and the sign that promised something it had never intended to deliver. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt something quieter, something close to grief for the place this could have been, for the people who had deserved to see it finished. Rex leaned against his leg. "I know," Jack said. 2 months later, Clara Simmons knocked on Jack's door. She stood on the porch with a casserole dish covered in foil, and her chin held steady and her eyes clear. Behind her, the first thin snow of December was just beginning to fall. "The county recovered most of the deposits. The investigator called this morning." She paused. "They said your records are what made the case." Jack nodded. He didn't say much. He never did. Clara looked down at Rex, who was sitting at Jack's feet, looking up at her with those amber eyes. She reached down and laid her hand on his head, and Rex stayed perfectly still and let her. "Your dog didn't like that man," Clara said quietly. "No, he didn't."
Smart dog. Smarter than me most days. Clara smiled at that, a real smile, the kind that reached the eyes, and handed him the casserole dish and walked back to her car through the falling snow. Jack stood in the doorway and watched her go. Rex pressed against his leg, warm and solid and present the way he always was. The snow fell soft and steady over the fields and the road and the bare oak tree at the edge of the yard, covering everything in a quiet white that made the world look clean and unhurried, full of second chances. Because real courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a man who slows down when everyone else is rushing. Sometimes it's a dog who growls at what the eye can't see. And sometimes it's a knock on a neighbor's door to say, "I think something is wrong, and I'm not going to walk past it." If this story moved something in you, if you believe that loyalty, honesty, and looking out for your neighbor still matter in this world, subscribe to Jack and Rex Tales and never miss a story about the quiet kind of courage that holds a community together. Because this world still needs people who show up, and it always will.